Have you ever felt overwhelmed by all those camera settings or wanted to shoot manual mode but don't even know where to begin? Well, today we're going to be breaking down ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, the foundation of photography. So why these three settings are so important is because every photo you take requires the perfect balance of all three of these settings to get the exact style and look that you're going for. So stick around today. I'm going to be giving you a little cheat sheet, side-by-side comparisons of the different settings at different levels, when you should use them and when you shouldn't use them. And hopefully at the end of this video, you're going to have mastered these settings and understood every single one of them. So starting with ISO, ISO controls your camera's sensitivity to light. And this is literally the sensor inside your camera, and you're controlling how sensitive the sensor is to the light that it's going to be taking in. And notice here, when I increase the ISO, it's going to brighten the image. If you put your camera in manual mode and you change the ISO, you can actually see the photo brightening in real time. So a low ISO, like 100 or 200, is best for bright conditions, and it's gonna make your photos really clean with minimal grain, or as we call it in the photography industry, noise. But when you're shooting in darker environments, you're gonna need to lift your ISO and bring it higher. So for example, going from 100 to 1000 or 1500, this is gonna make your photo brighter, but it's also gonna increase the amount of noise or grain in the photo. So to give you an example, look at these photos. One of them is shot at 125 ISO, one of them is shot at 3200 ISO, and one of them is shot at 16,000 ISO. Now notice the difference. The lower the ISO, the more high quality and clear the photo looks. So when you're shooting at a higher ISO, it's going to introduce that graininess that I was talking about earlier. One common mistake I see a lot is people will increase their ISO to brighten the image when that could have actually been corrected using shutter speed or aperture, which we're going to be getting into in a sec. So a pro tip with ISO is you should try and keep it as low as possible and only increase it when necessary. So when you're shooting in darker conditions, like at night, you're gonna have no choice but to increase that ISO to brighten your images a little bit. So next up, aperture. Aperture controls the amount of light that enters your camera through your lens. Now in photography, different lenses do different things. That's why we have different lenses. Some lenses are better for portraits, some are better for landscapes or sports. Each lens will have its own forte. When it comes to aperture, on the lens, it will typically tell you the lowest aperture that it'll be able to achieve. Typically, the more expensive, higher quality lenses will be able to achieve a lower aperture. And aperture is measured in f-stops. So a low aperture would be an aperture of f1.8, for example, and a higher aperture would be f22. When it comes to aperture, it's a little weird because the lower the number, so the lower your aperture, f1.8, will actually allow more light into the camera. Aperture is really important because it also affects the depth of field of your photos. For example, if you use an f1.8, the background is going to be very blurred. If you use f8, the background is going to be somewhat blurred, and if you use f22, the background is going to be almost completely in focus. So this is important to understand because this is going to allow you to get the type of photo you want. So if you're taking a portrait and you want the subject to be really in focus, but the background to be nice and blurred and smooth, you're going to want to use a lower f-stop. But if you're going to be taking landscape photography and you want this beautiful, gorgeous landscape to be completely in focus, you're going to want to use a higher aperture. So something like f22 or f18, something like that. And finally, there's also shutter speed. So shutter speed essentially controls how long your camera's sensor is exposed to the light. So there's literally a physical shutter in your camera that's going to open and close. So when you take that photo and you hear the ch-ch, that's the shutter opening and closing. So the faster the shutter opens and closes, the less light will come into the photo. But if you do ch-ch, that's going to mean more light will have time to enter the camera's sensor, and it's going to change how the photo comes out. So this is important to know because depending on the type of photo you want, you're going to have to change your shutter speed. So for example, if you're shooting a car driving by very fast, or sports and there's a guy running really fast and you want to capture that photo super clean, you're going to want to use a fast shutter speed. So it opens and closes really quick, and it's going to make your subject tack sharp. However, if you use a lower shutter speed, the subject will start here, your shutter is going to open, it's going to be taking in all that light, the man will be running by, and then the shutter will close. It's going to gather all the light or all the data from the man running, so it's going to be blurred. You can utilize lower shutter speeds to get light trails or waterfalls flowing really smooth, or even astrophotography. But be careful when using a slow shutter speed. You're gonna wanna use a tripod or have your camera balanced somewhere. Because when you're shooting handheld and you take a photo at a high shutter speed, there's not a lot of time for the shake of the camera to affect the photo. But if you're using a lower shutter speed and you're holding it handheld, even if you don't think you're moving, trust me, you are moving a little bit, and that movement while the shutter is open and the sensor is collecting all the data, all the light, it's gonna cause your photo to blur. So if you're shooting at a lower shutter speed, you're going to need to use a tripod. So I know that sounds like a lot of information and it sounds really complicated and confusing, but trust me, once you really visualize it and understand it, it's super simple. So this is something that helped me a lot when I first started photography. I'm gonna put a little cheat sheet I created right here on the screen. You can screenshot this and save it for later. I used this and kept it on my phone when I would go out and take photos. And if I ever needed a little reminder of what a certain setting does, I can look at this and understand the changes it will make to my photo just by looking at it on my phone. So I suggest you screenshot this to keep this handy. Super good to just have that information at hand at all times. So now that you understand what these three settings do and how they'll affect the outcome of your photos, now we can work on starting to find the balance to get the perfect photo that you want. And if you really feel overwhelmed or you have no idea where to start, a super helpful tip. If you go to your camera in automatic mode, which does a really good job of figuring out a good starting point for your settings, and you'll notice the photo looks pretty good because it does a great job of giving you a good starting point. And if you look at the camera here, they're shooting at an ISO of 250 with f3.5 and a 1/30th shutter speed. Now, you can go back into manual mode and replicate these settings. So we can put the ISO at 250. The aperture is already set at f3.5, and then we can put the shutter speed down to 1/30th, and it will actually give you that exact same photo as it was in automatic. So it's just a good starting point to get decent lighting in your photo. So take a look at my camera. I'll show you how each one of these settings actually affects your photo in real time. So when you want to take a photo, you can play around with these settings to find the exact lighting or style that you want. So let's just say we want to keep our ISO low, around 500. You can notice the photo is a little bit too dark. So we're gonna lower our aperture to f3.5. That's the lowest it goes on this lens to brighten the image. That means it's letting more light in, but the photo's still a little bit dark. So we're gonna lower our shutter speed a little bit, and now the photo is super bright. So you can see how each one of these settings affects the brightness and the amount of light in your photo. Now let's just say you want to take a photo with a very shallow depth of field. So you want the subject, in this case the can, in focus but the background completely blurred. What you're going to want to do is lower your aperture as low as possible. So in this case f3.5 is as low as my lens can go. And take a look at the results of this photo. The background, my coffee machine back there, is completely blurred out. You can't really see. But now look what happens if I increase my f-stop. So I'm increasing my aperture to f22. So now the goal is to have the background in focus, which is why we're increasing our aperture. But because we're doing that, we're letting in less light. So now the photo is going to be very dark. To compensate for this, we're going to have to change one of the other two settings. So either ISO or shutter speed. So we're going to lower down our shutter speed. So we're going to keep that camera shutter open longer, which is going to give us more light in the photo. And now look what happens when I take this photo. The background is going to be completely in focus because the aperture is f22. So once you change one setting, it might affect the other two. So really you're going to want to see what your goal is of the photo, whether it's a portrait or a landscape. You want shallow depth of field, you're going to want a low shutter speed to have light trails, or a fast shutter speed to capture a crisp raindrop. You're gonna have to ask yourself, what type of photo do you want? And from there, you're gonna have to set each different setting to achieve that goal. And that's really the fun and the magic of photography, is every photo is the perfect balance of these three settings to get the exact image that's in your head. And also, I really want to put this out there, shooting manual is an amazing way to capture photos and a really amazing way to get better at photography. But at first it is overwhelming. It definitely was for me, and I'm sure it is for a lot of people. But don't be afraid to shoot in automatic. I suggest you learn manual, but at first, if you want to just take some awesome photos, put it in automatic. take the photos you want to take in automatic and then study the settings that were used in that automatic photo. So you can take a photo and then go look at the settings and be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. This photo was great and these were the settings it used. Okay, I noticed that there's a smaller aperture or there's a faster shutter speed, or oh wow, the ISO is really high on this photo, that's why it didn't come out so good. Automatic settings on cameras are great these days and they can do a lot of the work for you. So don't be afraid if you want to shoot an automatic. And that's it for me today. I really hope you learned something from this video. I hope now you can go and practice and master these 3 settings so you can take the photos you want every single time and make the most out of the wonderful world of photography. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you think you've learned something, hit the like button. If you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe or follow me on social media. The support really helps me to keep making these videos. So thank you so much for all your support and I hope to see you next time. Have a great night. Peace.